Having aesthetic shoulders is essential to having an aesthetic physique. So in this video, I'm going to cover how to build aesthetic shoulders with only dumbbells at your disposal so you can build some 3D deltoids and get that V-taper physique that everyone wants.
Alright, so in order to grow aesthetic shoulders, you have to understand that there are three separate heads of the deltoids that all require their own movement patterns in order to best optimally grow them. In order of importance, there's the rear delts, which sit behind you, then there's the side delts, and then lastly there are the front deltoids. By dedicating individual exercises for all three heads of the shoulders, you're ensuring that you're developing the shoulders in a well-rounded manner. So it's not like you have overdeveloped front delts with underdeveloped rear delts. That's just gonna look really odd. If you've ever seen people with kind of like slouch posture where it looks like they're kind of like hunched over, chances are they probably have underdeveloped rear delts, which is the big reason why I like to prioritize those first. And then second would be the side delts. These two are generally less developed. And then the last priority is generally the front delts, because if you're following a well-rounded routine and doing a lot of push exercises, the front delts are already gonna get a pretty good amount of stimulus from that alone. So shoulder days for me, I mainly prioritize side delts and rear delts. There's an argument to be made which one's more important than the other, but I like to do the rear delts because it's one of the most neglected muscle groups on anyone. Like I'm telling you right now, if you develop your rear delts, you're gonna have immediately more aesthetic shoulders. And it's just gonna make your overall physique from behind much more aesthetic. So let's get to it. So when it comes to dumbbell training, my favorite rear delt exercise is the chest-supported rear delt row. Now for many people, especially beginners, I noticed that rear delts are a more elusive muscle to train, meaning it's kind of hard to really know if you're actually training them or you're not. You haven't developed like a mind-muscle connection to understand what working your rear delts would actually feel like. And especially when you're doing a compound movement like this, like a row, how do you know if you're hitting your rear delts over your biceps or your lats? Well, it comes down to the position of your shoulders. If you're trying to bias your rear delts, you want to have your shoulders out about halfway in between. This is around 45 degrees of shoulder abduction. Any higher than this, if you're pulling from this area, you're gonna be biasing more of your mid-back. And if you have your arms tucked, this is gonna be more of a lat-focused row. Now that's the first thing. The second thing you wanna avoid doing is squeezing your shoulder blades back into movement. And I'm gonna demonstrate this. The incorrect way to do this is to squeeze your shoulder blades back like this as you do the row. Because rear delts don't really contribute to scapular retraction. This is gonna be more your traps and rhomboids. Instead, I like to keep my shoulder blades more protracted, so a little bit more stretched further apart, and I focus on rowing while keeping my shoulder blades in place. See the difference? This is gonna be a more rear delt focused row. Now play around with this. Another thing you can also play around with is the bench angle. I have it around roughly 45 degrees. If you find it hard and you feel like you're just hitting your lats, what you can do is actually bring the bench up a little higher. Make sure you kind of clear the bench and you're hunching over. From this position, it's gonna be much more awkward for you to squeeze your shoulder blades. So in essence, it makes it easier for you to stay protracted so that you can bias your rear delts on this exercise. Now, if you tried this out and you still feel like you're struggling to actually feel your rear delts or struggling to grow them in general, and this goes for pretty much any other muscle group, then I highly recommend you apply to my exclusive one-on-one fitness coaching program. Part of the program are actual form critiques. So if you're having trouble with performing exercises correctly or you just want me to take a look at it, then that's definitely a great opportunity to do so. So apply in the link in the description, see my testimonials right here. Go on to the second exercise. All right, second shoulder exercise, and that is the chest-supported lateral raise. Now the idea with using a bench to kind of brace yourself is you're more stable in this position, right? I find that a lot of people, if you're standing, you're in the habit of kind of using your hips. Momentum is a much bigger factor, but If you're using this bench, it pretty much eliminates the momentum. You're gonna notice it makes this exercise a lot more harder, which is a good thing. You're able to better focus purely on that shoulder abduction and working that side delt. Now, I pretty much just keep it at the highest setting, but you can bring the setting down a little bit lower. Ultimately, it's personal preference, but I wouldn't go beyond this bench angle or else you kind of start turning into more of like a Y raise. The alternative to this exercise is also a unilateral lateral raise. I think that can be a pretty good option when we're working with dumbbells. But I personally prefer this chest supported one because in some cases, I think it is more stable than the unilateral lateral raise, ironically. Now, a common misconception for side delt training is thinking you have to go super light and work at a super high rep range, but treat it like any exercise, right? Let's say you use a pretty heavy weight where you can get, let's say, 8 reps with it. It's gonna be probably much more heavier than what you're used to compared to if you're doing like 12 reps. And like you saw I did, what you can do is bust out into some lengthened partials right after you reach failure with full range of motion. That's not required, but it is a great way to kind of push past failure, especially considering that this is a shortened focus exercise, meaning the hardest part's gonna be up here, so naturally you're gonna fatigue up here first. But just because you can't get the full range of motion from up here doesn't mean you should stop, because we have all this other room to work with, right? So I know you're like, oh, Tyler, you know, of course you gotta do a lateral raise, but there's stuff you can do to make it even more, call it like optimal for muscle growth. So definitely try using it with a bench and definitely bust in some lengthened partials afterwards. So that's the second exercise. Let's move on to the third one. All right, last dumbbell shoulder exercise to build stacked shoulders is the seated shoulder press. Make sure if you have the option for using a bench over a seat, use the bench. It is much better because you're more stable, meaning again, if you're more stable, you can better focus on purely just working whatever muscle you're trying to work. This case is gonna be the front delts and side delt. If you go in this order and you do shoulder press last, your side delts ultimately do play a role in a shoulder press. You're gonna feel that your side delts are kind of pre-exhausted, which shouldn't be seen as a bad thing. The front delts will still have the most leverage to do this movement, and because the front delts are generally overdeveloped, I don't think there's a real need to like specifically isolate the front delts as in like with a front raise. So this is definitely a good option. The most efficient way to set up for this exercise is grab the dumbbells, and when you're seated, to bring the dumbbells up, make sure you place the dumbbells on kind of like the corner of your knee, okay? This way you're gonna have easier time launching them in the air like this and getting them in position. Now when you're doing the press, I like pressing a little bit in front of me in my scapular plane. So I'm not pressing completely out to the side. This is gonna be a better position than if you're completely out to the side, especially if you're experiencing some sort of like shoulder pain. So pressing your scapular plane is gonna be a great way to avoid shoulder pain if you experience it from pressing completely out to the side. So that's the last exercise, but there's one more thing I wanna talk about. And the last thing I need to mention if you want aesthetic shoulders is body fat percentage. You need to be at a lower body fat percentage in order to see the striations and the separation between your shoulder as well as your biceps in the first place. The reason why I look the way I do is because I hover between the 10 to 12% body fat range. But for most individuals, ideally aiming for around 15% is a really good sweet spot, because while anyone can get to like 10% body fat, it's a different question if they can actually sustain it in the first place. Every individual is different. You might have a higher body fat set point and feel like dog water being at 10%. So that's why I say aim for 15%. At that point, you are gonna start seeing the separation between your shoulders as well as your arms. So while yes, training your shoulders will definitely grow your side delts, front delts, rear delts, if it's covered by body fat, it's just not gonna look the same. With that in mind, I hope if y'all are limited on equipment that this helps out. Definitely like this video if you found it helpful. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And let me know in the comments what other videos you want to see in the first place. Do you want to see me doing like more dieting stuff? Just let me know what y'all want to see and I will actually take it to heart. So I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.